A lot of people don't think it's possible for them to get a full 8 hours of sleep every night. And I don't really blame them because I didn't think this was possible either for me. I thought the most amount of sleep I could get was about 6.5 hours for a long time. But you might be surprised that there's a lot of little things you can start doing to start increasing the amount of time that you're in bed sleeping. And those little things can not only increase the amount of time you're sleeping, but also improve your focus, improve your memory, improve your immune system, and all sorts of things to your body throughout the day. So one thing that's really important to understand when you're trying to sleep longer and trying to get those full 8 hours of sleep is controlling your circadian rhythm. Because you got to understand what exactly controls your sleep. There are two major things that control your sleep. The first is your circadian rhythm, which I'm going to get into. The second is a molecule called adenosine. Your adenosine is basically your body's sleep pressure and is completely independent of your circadian rhythm. Basically, your adenosine will build up throughout the day the more you are awake. If you're awake for 24 hours straight, then your adenosine will have built up for those 24 hours. And it only goes away when you sleep it off. So once you go to sleep, then the adenosine will start to dissipate. On the other hand, your circadian rhythm is completely different and is controlled mainly by a hormone called melatonin. So your melatonin is something that will peak at nighttime. So one of the major things that will control your melatonin is sunlight. So when there is sunlight present, then your melatonin will drop. And when there's an absence of melatonin or no melatonin around in your brain, then it's going to be a signal for your body to wake up. But when your melatonin is peaking and there's a ton of melatonin in your brain, then that's a signal for your brain to go to sleep. So your melatonin will cycle through these 24-hour cycles where it'll peak at nighttime in response mainly to darkness, and then it'll drop during the daytime in response to sunlight. And even if you stay up for 24 hours straight, this melatonin will still go on this 24-hour cycle. It doesn't care how long you've been awake. So timing your sleep correctly in relation to your circadian rhythm will be super important if you want to start sleeping a full 8 hours. So one easy way to do that is to start going to sleep when you're tired. A lot of people have this problem where they're tired, let's say around 10 p.m., but they keep pushing themselves to stay awake until midnight or sometimes even after midnight by watching shows or watching something on their phone. And then they go to sleep and they find that they're awake at like 6 or 6:30 and they can't go back to sleep. And then they might wonder that, hey, maybe I only need 6 or 6.5 hours of sleep. The only problem is I'm still exhausted when I wake up. Well, this is the problem because at 6 or 6:30, now your melatonin has dissipated because it has already gone through its 24-hour cycle, so that's a signal for your body to wake up. But those first 2 hours where your melatonin was peaking, you weren't taking advantage of that by going to sleep then. So it's really important to start going to sleep at a consistent time and go to sleep as soon as you're tired. Don't push it. Now, the second problem with that scenario is you're looking at your phone or a TV show. Now, the problem with looking at these screens before you go to bed is that they emit a lot of blue light. So light will go on different wavelengths and different frequencies, and our brain will respond differently depending on the type of light. So if we're seeing a blue light, this is really similar to the light that we're seeing throughout the day from sunlight. So if we're seeing a blue light from our phone or from a screen, this is going to be a signal to our brain that it's sunlight outside. And this is also going to be a signal to diminish our melatonin. So now not only are you pushing yourself to stay awake, you're now lowering the melatonin in your brain by staring at a screen or staring at a different type of blue light right before you want to go to sleep. So in a nutshell, the best way to control your circadian rhythm is going to be by exposing yourself to daylight during the daytime where the sun is actually out. And then when it comes to nighttime, only exposing yourself to darkness. So this is why I always give one tip to people if they have to wake up in the middle of the night and go to the bathroom, try to avoid turning the lights on. Because once you turn that light on, that's going to really diminish your melatonin and really make it harder for you to go back to sleep. So one way to do this is to get a small night light installed in your bathroom or something where you don't see it when you're sleeping, but if you have to go to the bathroom, you don't have to turn that light on so you don't get as much light exposure. Or you could just close your eyes and walk to the bathroom and then maybe sit down when you're peeing and hope that you don't create a mess or anything. That's another way to do it. But It's going to be better than turning that light on and making it harder for you to go back to sleep once you get back in bed. Now, another important thing you need to start doing if you want to sleep longer, and I already mentioned this a little bit, is be very consistent with when you're sleeping and when you're waking up. Now, this is going to be a really hard one for people, especially on the weekends, because a lot of people have to wake up early on the weekdays, but then on the weekends, we like to sleep later and then sleep in. But making sure you sleep at the same time and wake up at the same time is going to be one of the easiest ways to start improving your sleep and start to sleep longer. And we can already start to understand why, right? Because now we're controlling our circadian rhythm and we're not fluctuating our circadian rhythm. We're not fluctuating our melatonin release. But also, we're not fluctuating the amount of NREM and REM sleep we're getting. So our sleep is broken down into different stages. So it starts off as NREM or non-REM sleep, and then the last part of our sleep cycle is called REM sleep. So REM sleep is basically where a lot of our dreaming will occur, and it's called rapid eye movement, and it's characterized by our eyes darting back and forth. And our non-REM sleep is basically the opposite. It's where a lot of our deep sleep occurs, and it's also very important, but not as much dreaming will occur here. And one really interesting thing about our sleep is it's not even. So our NREM and our REM sleep distribution is not even throughout their night. So in the beginning hours of our sleep, we're going to get a lot more NREM sleep. But then in the later hours, those last 2 hours of our sleep, we're going to get a lot more REM sleep. Now, this is really important to understand because let's say that you typically sleep from midnight to 8 a.m. Those are your 8 hours of sleep, and that's where your circadian rhythm has always been working. But now you go to sleep 2 hours later, and you sleep at 2 a.m., and you wake up at 8 a.m. So you get 6 hours of sleep, but you cut out only those first 2 hours of your typical sleep cycle. You're going to be cutting out a whole lot of your NREM sleep, but not as much of your REM sleep. Now, at the same time, if you go to sleep at midnight, but now you have to wake up early and you wake up at 6 a.m. Now, you're not going to be cutting out an even amount of your NREM and your REM sleep. Just like before, you're going to be cutting out about 60 to 90% of your REM sleep by just simply waking up 2 hours earlier. Now, you might be wondering, why did our brains work like this? Why do our brains not just make an even amount of NREM and REM sleep? Because sometimes I can't sleep a full 8 hours at the regular times where I normally do. Well, part of the reason could be that this is just how our brains are processing new information and how our brains can store new information. Because our NREM and our REM sleep have very specific functions, and they're both extremely important for our memories. So our NREM sleep will sort of prune off new information. So we have all this information that's in our brain. Our NREM sleep will kind of act like a filter, and it'll filter out all the bad information, all the information that we don't really care about, and it'll focus more on the information that is more important to us. And then our REM sleep is really important for more general knowledge and more creative thinking. So both of these things are very important, but they come at different times. So you can see why sleeping at a consistent time is super important. Not just so that you can sleep a full 8 hours, but also because you want to get enough of that NREM and that REM sleep. Now, another way to start sleeping longer is by making sure you're getting enough of your sleep opportunity time. So when someone says that they get 8 hours of sleep, what does that really mean? Does that mean that I go to bed at midnight, I immediately fall asleep, I wake up at 8 a.m., and boom, that's my 8 hours? Well, not necessarily, because in that scenario, you're not going to be sleeping 100% of the time. You probably realistically got 7 to 7.5 hours of sleep if you were in bed from midnight to 8 a.m. So your sleep opportunity time is super important if you want to increase the amount of hours that you're sleeping. That is basically the amount of time that you're actually actively trying to fall asleep and stay asleep. So again, you want to make sure that you're going to bed when you're tired and not forcing yourself to stay awake, especially by looking at those screens that are going to make it even harder for you to stay asleep. And the second thing you want to do is if you want to get 8 hours of sleep, you need to give yourself 8.5 hours to 9 hours of actual sleep opportunity time. So give yourself more time to actually try to fall asleep and stay asleep, because you know you're not going to be sleeping 100% of the time when you're in bed trying to sleep. Now, another common culprit in people not being able to sleep and not getting good sleep quality and not being able to stay asleep is something called an overactive sympathetic nervous system. So your sympathetic nervous system is basically, it's part of your body's autonomic nervous system. And your autonomic nervous system has two parts. It's your parasympathetic and your sympathetic. You might have heard of this from biology class or psychology class, but basically your sympathetic nervous system is your body's fight or flight response, and your parasympathetic nervous system is your body's rest and relax response. So if you have too much of your sympathetic nervous system, that means you're going to be way too anxious, way too stressed out, and always in this fight or flight mode. So the reason that our sympathetic nervous system got this name fight or flight is because back when we were hunter-gatherers, that's when our sympathetic nervous system would mainly be activated, when we were fighting off a predator or hunting for something or running. It's more of a tool for survival because our blood pressure will start to rise, our pupils will dilate, all these things will happen to our body that will help us in a situation where we need to fight off a predator or escape and survive. But the thing is that all of these changes will still happen in our body if we are chronically stressed or if we are anxious. So if you're trying to fall asleep and you're constantly being anxious and you're just lying in bed, then you want to try a couple things. So first of all, if you're laying in bed for over 20 minutes and you can't fall asleep, a good rule is to get out of bed and start doing something else until you feel tired, because otherwise you're just going to get more and more anxious and start looking at the clock and then really make it harder for you to go to sleep again. And another thing you can do is some sort of relaxation or something to help you calm down before you go to sleep. This is also something that you can try to do throughout the day too, where you just want to try to calm your body down and calm your brain down. So there's a lot of different breathing exercises you can do. I talked about some of those in a different video of mine, a different podcast, and I'm going to put a link to that in the description below if you're interested in that. You can also try taking hot showers or going on walks, spending time with nature, or if you like doing yoga, whatever it is, if there's something that helps you calm down and relax, make sure that you incorporate that as well, especially if you're trying to go to sleep. Now, you also want to make sure that you limit or cut out your alcohol and your caffeine. First of all, your caffeine or your coffee, there's studies showing that that will also spike your sympathetic nervous system. So that alone will make it harder for you to go to sleep. But your caffeine also causes a problem because it blocks your adenosine receptors. So we learned a little bit about this before, where your adenosine is a molecule that helps you go to sleep. It's basically your body's sleep pressure, and it builds up throughout the day the longer that you are awake. And this is one of the two signals that helps you go to sleep. And if you're drinking caffeine, then your caffeine is going to be blocking these adenosine receptors. So it's going to make you a lot less tired and harder for you to go to sleep. And there's actually studies showing that people who are drinking a lot of coffee, they'll mimic a lot of the symptoms of insomnia because this caffeine is making it harder for them to go to sleep and to stay asleep. And what happens is they actually start relying on this coffee more the next day because they didn't sleep so well. And then it turns into this never-ending cycle where they never really attribute their bad sleep to that caffeine. They always attribute it to something else. And also with alcohol, it does absolutely nothing good to your sleep. It's more of a sedative, so it'll help you fall asleep faster, but that quality of sleep will really suck. So first of all, it'll fragment your sleep, so you'll wake up more throughout the night. And it'll also prevent you from getting as much deep sleep. And you won't get as much of that REM sleep. So your sleep quality is going to be really terrible when you're drinking alcohol. Now, the last tip I have, if you want to start improving the amount of sleep that you're getting, is to start exercising. Now, there's a bunch of studies that we have that show the importance of exercise, and basically anybody who is more fit or physically fit than someone else, they're going to be much less likely to get different diseases. They're going to be at a much less likelihood of dying compared to the less fit person. But there's also a ton of evidence we have that simply exercising more throughout the day will improve your sleep and also improve your ability to fall asleep. So make sure you start incorporating an exercise routine as well. Every time you go to sleep, it essentially refreshes your brain and makes room for new memories to come in. Basically, the way that your memory works is as you're awake throughout the day, you're getting all this new information. And all this information is going into your hippocampus. That is a region in your brain. And your hippocampus is important